Welcome to Under the Tin. In this series, we're going to be speaking to people at all different levels of the game who are intertwined within the fabric of the sport. We want to understand the different perspectives and the challenges that we're facing within squash, but more importantly, we want to understand what we can all do to ensure a bright future for the game we love. So today I'm welcoming Ben Hutton, head coach at Sussex Squash and co-owner of Hove Fitness and Squash in Brighton. So welcome, Ben. Thanks for joining us today. Can you start things off by talking us through your journey in squash and how you've come to be where you currently are within the sport?
Well, firstly, hi Jethro, and thanks for having me on Under the Tin. It's a great honour. It's a bit of a roller coaster, really. I mean, I picked up a squash racket when I was 9 and started playing at what was Corals from then. It was a real buzz of a club, had 8 courts, 3 badminton courts, and a very strong membership base. Bar was 4 deep through the 80s, and it was a really thriving squash club. Needless to say, we became quite hooked quite quickly, and we used to spend every living moment, every hour at that club that we had spare. So weekends, school holidays. I mean, I used to use my birthday money or my Christmas money to buy my yearly membership, and we just used to live there basically and just run amok. We had sort of almost free run of the club when it was quiet, and we certainly took advantage of it. So started there, and obviously sort of played a lot of junior squash and team squash and county squash. Tournaments were difficult because I went to Brighton College and we had school at the weekends, the Saturdays, and sometimes to go and do chapel on Sunday. So it made it really difficult to go and play tournaments at the weekend. Played a few, but mainly sort of just played through the county setup, and then sort of played a lot of other sport as well as a youngster. So a lot of rugby, and then a lot of football sort of in my late teens. I played a lot of football, and squash kind of sort of took a bit of a back burner for a couple of years, and sort of I re-emerged sort of around sort of 22, 23. I had quite bad injuries, so that took me for about a year playing football, and the injuries have just sort of progressed from there, really. Football was the catalyst for a lot of my troubles, and people that know me know I've suffered with dodgy ankles, but mainly that's all stemmed from the football. But I was kind of in a dead-end job, let's say, when I was 22, 23, just sort of had jazz, so my world was a bit sort of crazy, really, really young dad, and really didn't know what to expect, and had to work quite quickly, so that put pay to sort of playing squash sort of as much as I would have liked. So just sort of fitted it in around work, and and then my good dear friend Mike Harris, who was a real rock for me in those days, just said, look, do your level 1, I'll help you get through your level 2 and level 3, because he was head coach at Corals at the time, and he basically had a very big commitment with England squash. He couldn't commit as much time as he would have liked to Corals, and Corals wanted him to commit a little bit more time. So it kind of went from there, really, and he almost sort of like fed me into the role of head coach at Corals. And it's all sort of gone from there, really. It's been a real roller coaster of 14, 15 years. It's actually been mental. I've loved every minute of it. And I love my life now. It's been a real blessing to have had that opportunity to become head coach at Corals and sort of take over from where Mike had left off and start again, really. So, I think I went in. Go on.
No, well, we'll come back to you. Carry on, and then we'll come back to the corals journey. I'm quite intrigued. I'm sure lots of people are interested to hear, some of the challenges that the club's faced recently, and the position you've recently or just got it to, kind of pre-pandemic, and then we've obviously gone into lockdown. So we'll dive into the corals story as soon as you've finished saying what you were saying.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, if it wasn't for my partner, you might be able to hear banging away in the kitchen in the background. She really sort of convinced me to make this change as well. I mean, she was a real rock in terms of support, because, I was basically giving up a job where I had a regular income and guaranteed income to just sort of go, I'm in my late 20s, just to go, right, just going to stop it all and just start again.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I did, and yeah, it's been an amazing 15 years, and a lot of highs, not lows, but a lot of highs, and then back on high now, having had a pretty hard low at the beginning of March last year. So yeah.
So how COVID's impacted things with you at Coral, what was Corals, and that you've taken on the club now. So do you want to talk us through that process?
Yeah, it was so March last year. We were made aware. I mean, the year before, I had negotiated a new contract with the owners of the site. They didn't see me as an employee. They wanted me to be an outside sourced contractor. So I had to renegotiate my contract with them, but they're really, really good. GVC, who own Corals, or Coral and Ladbrokes, etc. They've been nothing but supportive and quite helpful, actually. When everyone got laid off, they looked after me. They didn't have to, but they did. They honoured my contract and were really good. But we were all kind of told that basically they were going to shut the club last March. They said they were going to take the process of looking into redundancy, that we knew that it was curtains, basically. So then it was a question of what can we do. As soon as people started getting wind of it, I'd loads of the squash community from the club, amazing people, really amazing people in the club, just all sort of came to the forefront and said, look, let's try and see what we can do. Because I'd already asked the company, what are we going to do with the site? You're making us all redundant. There's 6 squash courts. There's a massive gym, 2 studio, and an old preschool that was now finished and closed. There's a massive site there. What are you going to do with it? And they were like, well, we're just going to mothball it. We're just going to lock it up and leave it. And I was, well, can we not rent it? Can we not buy it? Started just asking a few questions as to what we could do to change their mind, or to let us carry on running it. So we had a few other people that were interested in taking the site. Our team put together a bid. The other teams put bids together, and thankfully our bid was successful. Had a few little hiccups along the way, a few little issues, but it all got resolved, and we're now up and running as Hove Fitness and Squash, in a good position to reopen when the government allows to. We're kind of hoping around beginning of April, middle of April maybe. Mm-hmm. Praying that we can open the doors again, and we're ready to go. We're in a good position. So it's exciting times. It's frustrating that it's actually only really been open 2 months.
Yeah.
So a lot of lockdown.
I think we're all frustrated by lockdown. But yeah, no, that's completely understandable. It's going to, I bet you're itching to get back in. So, I mean, just to take a step back then, because obviously squash is facing challenges now with a post-pandemic world, but clearly there have been challenges within squash in a pre-pandemic world, which I guess was partly due to the reason that Corals thought about closing the club, or what was the reason that the club was closing prior to
well, basically, the reasons that they wanted to close the club was they didn't see the revenue in the club. Obviously, they wanted to make it a company where the club was pulling in the money. They didn't have to subsidise it through other parts of their business, and they said that they didn't see the money in it. We were talking about a 3-year refurb plan on all the courts, hacking them right back to the walls, like completely replastering. That was going to cost about 60 grand. They actually used that as one of the reasons why they wanted to close, because they didn't want to spend the money on refurbing the courts. We didn't really need to get it done. I was just pushing to get a refurb, really, just in case we were going to stay there for the foreseeable. But they said that they didn't see any money in the club, so they didn't want to carry on with it, because they wanted to rebrand as well. That's right. They wanted to step away from having any association to Coral, the brand. So we had to rebrand as well, and they got a figure to rebrand, and they put that into the equation as well. And another reason that they used to tell us why we were closing. So I don't necessarily think it was squash related why Corals was closing. I think it was more factors than just the squash.
Right. Because squash is kind of booming, certainly the junior section down there in Sussex. You've had some phenomenal results recently, right? And I mean, how do you I guess that's an elite level, but then how does that compare with participation numbers as well, kind of within?
Well, I mean, it was no coincidence that we've had a purple patch over the last sort of 10 years. I put a lot of time and effort into building something at Corals that probably took me 10 years really to see a real sort of impact into the work I'd done, with the likes of Jazz obviously being at the forefront, and Tom Walsh. We had a few other juniors that were a little bit older than her and those two. But then through that, we had a lot of other kids come through, and obviously saw them playing, saw them training and playing in tournaments, and obviously winning lots of trophies. And it kind of grew from there, really, and then had a really good little setup for about 5-10 years, where a load more kids came through. My club were going to national tournaments, and I was taking like 10-15 kids from my club to compete in a junior tournament, which was sometimes more than some counties would take. So it was a really good time. It was a really, and then obviously we had a few other coaches around the county, dotted around the county, doing good things as well, and had sort of Cameron and his kids and the other kids that were coming through with them, and we had some really good players. So Sussex enjoyed a very good 5 or 6 years of winning national titles. But the juniors, Curtis, Torrey, Tom, Jazz, they all won titles and some national titles. But it's coming to an end, I think. I think we as a county have recognised this in lockdown. A few words were said, and we need to sort of increase those participation numbers again. So I need to start again at Hove Fitness Squash. I've got about 10, 11, 15 kids really there now that have come back sort of after lockdown. Quite a few young ones, so I'm quite excited about that to sort of work with them. But I need to regroup and go again and try and recreate what I had a few years ago with Jazz, Tom, Lucas Hughes, Noah Meredith, Frankie Smith. I mean, obviously Frankie, Jonah are still about, but there are others. Lucas Hughes, Ashley Hughes, but he's no longer playing, sadly. There are a lot of good players, and I need to redo it. I need to get it going again. So what is how am we going to do it?
Well, that was going to be my next question. Was for people listening to this, we all, I think, have an obligation to try and get more people into the sport, particularly once we go go in after the pandemic, and I'm wondering what kind of tactics you typically employ, both well, let's start with the juniors, but then also an adult level, that kind of recruitment drive. What have you typically found works well? Let's start with the junior level, and how do you see your rollout plan working when we get the opportunity?
So when I became a coach, I needed to make sure that I had enough money to pay the bills and help with put Jazz through school, stuff like that. So I was quite heavily involved in a lot of the private schools around Sussex. But obviously, private schools, it's a guaranteed income, and we had a few juniors coming through those schools. But ultimately, I feel you really need to sort of try and increase the numbers that come through, and then when you cast the net, although a lot are going to slip through the net, you will get those little nuggets that you can hold on to and latch onto, that find an identity through playing squash, and then sort of want to play squash because it's not like everyone else, and it's not football, and it's not what everyone else is doing. So they have this sort of like unique bond with it, where they're doing something that they like. So I was just starting to get my teeth into setting up a school's development plan for my club. And we had one of my juniors, who's no longer junior, who's now a level 2 coach, Noah. He was going in and delivering mini squash in a couple of primary schools. And then we had a primary school that was walking to the club, which was in walking distance. They came to the club, and we just had an inter-school sort of fun day arranged for a whole afternoon, where the 2 schools that Noah was going to were going to come to the club and spend an afternoon actually trying to play proper squash and having some fun interaction, sort of like as a sort of almost like a school rivalry. But obviously that got canned, and that was really frustrating. But been speaking to the schools that they still very much want to stay involved and get that going again. So that's a positive. But as a county, we've recognised that we need to do a little bit more as a county-led operation as well to get into the schools. I mean, if you look at Essex and what the guys are doing, what the Selbys are doing with off-the-wall squash, you can see there that if you get the right plan and you get the right format in place, it does work, and they've got unbelievable numbers. And when you see some of the stuff that they're posting on social media with their inter-school competitions in Essex and stuff, it's fantastic. I mean, it's absolutely amazing, which other counties really need to sort of take a look at and say, well, okay, they can do it, and so can we, and use them as a role model, as a sort of benchmark to sort of where we want to get to as of how well they've done. Because they have done phenomenally well in Essex in terms of, the primary school games that they do. It's incredible. Nothing but utmost respect for off the wall, and the numbers they get through the doors at the Garrison and places like that. It's just amazing.
So you think schools is a really integral part of the kind of recruitment drive?
It's such a difficult question, and it's one of those ones that you can scratch your head at over and over again. And it is a numbers game, and you have to get those numbers through the door. But you've got to make it fun, and you've got to make it cool, because first and foremost, kids are looking at the footballers, and they're looking at the vast amounts of money that they earn.
Yeah.
And the money that they earn and the lifestyles that they have, and they want a piece of that pie, and they live in this fantasy world that they're all going to become the next Ronaldo, and obviously some will, but huge numbers don't.
Yeah.
So we've got to try and catch those kids in that net that we cast, and actually they go, well, you know what, I actually prefer playing squash to going and playing football with everyone on a Sunday and a Saturday, and hopefully we can nick a few more and increase our numbers.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense.
I think,
go on.
Well, I was just also going to say, but I think also the pro game, we need to sort of make that more accessible in terms of, sponsorship, big sponsors, corporate sponsors, prize money, to make it cool, so that the kids see this sport and go, well, that's cool as well, playing in this beautiful glass box outside the pyramids or Grand Central Station, and they want a piece of that pie rather than the football pie. So they need to work together, don't they, really?
For sure. I mean, it's quite exciting, this new in-front deal that PSA have just announced. I think is going to have a really significant impact at the top end of the game, and hopefully that will filter down. But yeah, you're completely right. Kids need to perceive it as something cool, to get excited about it.
But it is cool, and that's the sort of like the frustrating thing as well is. So I went to a school about a year and a half ago, and the guy used to come to my Wednesday club nights, and he was the sports teacher, PE teacher at this primary school. And he said, "Look, do you want to come in and do a day? We'd love to have you." So Noah and I went to this school, and we literally went in this sports hall, put up 3 nets, used a couple of spaces, marked out spaces around the wall to create little mini courts. And we were there all day, and we had every year group.
Yeah.
And we gave them flyers to hand out to the kids to go in their school bags at the end of the day and all that sort of stuff. And some of the kids had a great time. You could see there was real natural talent there. These kids were just smashing the ball with relative ease. And you thought, crikey, they'd be good. Or, you're watching this kid just sort of bounding around the area like a gazelle. And you think, these kids could really sort of become pretty good squash players. And none of them turned up at the club. Not one of them. Saw about 150 to 200 kids and didn't see any of them ever again, which is, but again, I suppose it's, if we could get a regular slot going into those schools and create a habit for the kids as well, where they are having it.
How do you feel it translates, the kind of hitting against the net in a school hall versus being on a squash court, or kind of hitting against a wall in a club and in a court? What's it like?
Well, that's something we highlighted sort of in lockdown as a county in our development meetings, where we would go into the schools with the nets, and how could we then make that transition from the school to the club so that the kids could go on the net and then have the opportunity to actually play on a squash court. So our next movement as a county is to go into some schools as an organisation, as Sussex Squash, to deliver 6-week courses within the schools, and then create this thing that Hampshire did really, really well called Squash Stars, which we're going to sort of hijack a little bit and borrow, because it's another great initiative. So we're then going to use the Squash Stars to try and encourage them to do the 6 weeks at school and then sign up to 6 weeks at a club. And with the 6 weeks at the club, you get a bag. It's just like a little carry bag, a squash ball, a pair of goggles, and a racket, like a starter pack, to then encourage them to come to the club. I think that's where you get the kids hooked, is once they actually have a go at smashing the ball at the wall and hitting it as hard as they like, then you sort of get them hooked.
Yeah, there's definitely that getting people into a squash club. That's the kind of the first step of no, it's not the very first step, but it's a key part of that journey, isn't it? So then, I mean, to throw that on then onto the adults, what's your take of kind of young adults post university? How many new people were you seeing coming into the club, and what were you seeing with kind of playing numbers at an adult level, and newbies coming into the sport? Kind of how was it looking, and then what do we need to do to kind of up that going forward?
I think that's like the Willy Wonka's golden ticket, isn't it? That actual question there is one question that's probably been on everyone's lips. I've had this conversation with previous managers at Corals. How do you attract that 25 to 30-year-old to 40-year-old bracket of player back to the club or back to wherever they base themselves after university? I mean, there are a lot of people out there that have played squash. It's why are they not playing squash now, we have an influx of players, but not really the numbers that we'd like, anywhere near the numbers we like. And then you'd have like your 40s, 50s, and 60s sort of dropping off the edge, as it were, and moving over to a bit of racquetball to carry on their rituals, isn't it? Really, it's their way of life, isn't it? All these adults, we've got all these people at the club, and that's one of the things that we really sort of honed in on when we wanted to get the club back, is that you're taking a community asset away from these people. This is their lives. Yeah. You're taking a routine out of these people's lives, where Monday afternoon they're in doing circuits, or Tuesday night you got Keith coming in to play his regular mate at racquetball, and then they'll stop and have 2 beers at the bar, and that is set in stone. And these people book these courts religiously for years and years and years, and then you take it away. I wish I had the answer to that question. You just scratch your head. How do you get that 30-year-old to come back to the club? I think sometimes people that play squash will look at the clubs within their area, and then they do a little bit of research as well. So I know that we had quite a successful period as a squash club, Corals, playing in the Sussex leagues, our local leagues, and we won the main title for quite a while. We had 7 or 8 men's teams playing in the county leagues, which is a huge number. So when people used to come to the club, they could see that there was a strong setup in place in terms of county squash, team squash, but also at one point I think we had 24 internal squash leagues. So yeah, it's dwindled to about 15 now in the last 15, as you can see. So it's gone from 24 down to sort of, at one point it was about 10, but we've got it back up to about 15 just before we got shut down. But more moving over to racquetball. So people were seeing that the club was successful, and then coming to have a look at the place and seeing that it was a old spit sawdust, type of squash club, bar by the courts, and a bit of an atmosphere, and they kind of liked it. So we caught a lot of new members in that way, through our success. But it's one of those things, isn't it? You get these people, they move away from university, they start a career, lives change, don't they? They then end up on a different path. How do we get them back to a squash club? It's the golden ticket, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there's bringing back those people who have kind of gone away and gone to university, but then there's also this challenge of introducing people to squash for the very first time, isn't it? Those beginner adults, I don't know. I guess it's not an easy sport, is it, to pick up? There are plenty of rules. You could do with your non-marking shoes, understanding what ball you're trying to use. I don't know if you've seen any particularly kind of successful drives for bringing brand new beginner adults into clubs, or if there's anything you've seen that's been done that's kind of lowered that barrier to entry, or if there's any ideas that you have that collectively we should all be kind of trying to look at.
It's really really tricky. I'm sort of pretty close to sort of when we get back from this last lockdown, hopefully it'll be the last one, to one of my old club members is a bit of a stalwart club player, played for the club at pretty much quite high level all the way through, solid squash player, solid racquetball player, had a good career. He's now retired, relatively young, and he wants to take on racquetball. So I've said to him that come and work at the club and you can be our full-time racquetball coach, and I want to actually run racquetball alongside squash in every aspect. So junior racquetball club night, we have racquetball leagues, and we have a lot of good racquetball players at the club. A lot of the good squash players are actually playing more racquetball at the moment because they seem to have more fun. So I don't want to take people away from squash, but it's probably a good introduction to get them to have a go at racquetball first and then pick up a squash racket. Because I get a lot of adults that come for a lesson and they really struggle with the technique of hitting a squash ball. Racquetball is a lot more forgiving.
Yeah.
And then hopefully you can make the transition and get them to do both. It's again, I think university can play a really large role as well in terms of beginner squash. I mean, I had sort of teenage kids try the game or have lessons. Their parents came along and said, "Oh, can you give so and so a lesson?" And I had this girl. She was a complete beginner. She had a few lessons, and then she went to university. And then before lockdown, the last lockdown, I actually sort of just glimpsed at her. She was on our courts playing either her boyfriend or brother, and it was about 6 or 7 years down the line. So she'd obviously gone to university, carried on playing at university at beginner level, and then obviously intermediate level, and now she's playing squash with her boyfriend or brother, and she's carried on. So I think we can try and create that community as well within the universities, and try and sort of get those graduates to sort of play, and then when they move on from university, they can carry on learning at the local squash club. Because I always use it as a selling point to the kids when they go to universities, that they can go to university. They like playing squash. Okay, what am I going to do? All right, I want to play squash. So I'm going to look to find the squash captain or whoever's running the committee for squash at the university, get involved in that aspect, make new friends, and so on. And it grows from there. And I always use that when talking to some of the kids. You can play this sport for life.
Yeah.
And it's a game that you can play for the rest of your life. And you're going to meet lots of friends, and that can become your world. These people that you play regularly become your social groups, and you forge friendships for life. So I've always used that as a almost like a USP to the kids when they go to uni. But getting them back when they're 30 is I wish I knew the answer to that. I mean, open days, groups, just sort of advertising as much as you can to the local area is.
Well, that was it kind of links in my next question as well. Fun, advertising, marketing, all this stuff requires funding, right? Fundamentally. And I'm wondering, given your involvement across the whole spectrum of the sport, really from club level through county level, and then obviously involved with the national setup with kids, what is the reality of the funding situation now within squash, and what do we need to do? Where does the funding come from? Should it be coming from the clubs? How much is available through counties? Then how much is kind of coming down from England Squash, from the governing bodies? And what do we need to do really as a sport to kind of create more access to funding? So maybe a bit of background first would be good on what the situation is, because it's changed a lot, hasn't it? I mean, England Squash used to have 70 odd staff, and there was huge amounts of funding available within the sport, wasn't there, 10, 15 years ago? And I think it's been greatly reduced, right?
Yeah, I mean, with jazz, I was very fortunate that I had a very good friend who was very, very supportive, who sponsored jazz, quite a way through her junior career with me, and now still sponsors her on the circuit, and then I had other people like Noah's dad, Nick Meredith, who runs a kitchen and bathroom fitting business in Brighton. He was really supportive, and he would always sort of sponsor like the kids' kit. So I always sourced stuff myself. I never had help from anyone in terms of corals. I never really got a bean from. Everything I tried to do through people who I thought would help me, who did help me, like getting a sponsor for a kit for the kids to go to tournaments in, so they looked all smart and snazzy, to doing things to help renovate the courts or to get their kit. All the rackets, balls, everything just came off my own back. Didn't really have a great deal of support. So I just thought, well, if you want something done properly, you've got to do it yourself. So I did a lot of it myself. But without people like Manny, Jazz's sponsor, people like Nick, other people as well that have helped me along the way. Without these people, I wouldn't have achieved half the stuff that we have as a club, as a coach, as a county. And you need people in the game helping, and whether it's volunteering, whether it's sponsoring, whether it's bunging you a bit of money to do this and do that. They're just vital to the survival of the game, and it's these people that we need to tap into, really. I mean, England squash, I don't think they're going to have the answer. They're going to do all they can to grow the sport and keep the sport alive, but we need other people, wealthy people, to invest in what we want to do as a sport. Whether that's putting up more money for bigger tournaments, whether that's helping clubs with their junior program, and we need this support. But then also, if you do have a club, we were talking about Nick's interview before we went on air. You've got that proactive company, the people that own the building, that own the business. They love the game. So Pontefract, is a classic example of people that work together generally do well and succeed. And if you have everyone singing from the same hymn sheet, it makes it a hell of a lot easier to having to deal with people that don't want to put a budget in for squash. Or, well, squash doesn't make us this much money, whereas our studios and our gym are generating millions. We're going to just leave squash and let it rot. If you work together and get everyone singing from the same hymn sheet, the whole thing works together. And Pontefract is a classic example of that, where they've got studios, they've got gym, they've got squash courts, they've got the badminton courts at the back, and all these people come together. And they all drink in the bar, and they have these big functions, and you can buy food. It's there, it's set up, and they know that they can go there, have a meal, play squash, have a beer, or they don't even have to go to the gym. They can just turn up and chat to people at the bar because everyone knows each other. So there's a massive community at that place, a thriving community. And one of the reasons why it's so successful is, all the efforts that Mick and Malcolm and everyone involved at Pontefract, the club itself, not just the squash club, have made it what it is. So I'm a part owner of a club. I value everyone involved in the club. We've had some amazing support through the last lockdowns, with people carrying on their subs. If it wasn't for these people helping us, it would have been a lot more difficult to open up in April in a good position. And like I said, you need these people around you, whether it's the gym people, or your studio people, or your squash people. You have this fantastic support. It makes it so much easier. So yeah, it's just need people with big hearts to help, and need more of them.
But I guess once you get to that stage, then it can become self-fulfilling. I guess that's the reality of Pontefract. It's a successful business, right? But it's taken that hard work to build that community, isn't it? And I guess some of the challenges I'm seeing are bringing new beginner juniors into the ecosystem, and then bringing beginner adults into the system. And you talked about the access to funding and the kind of sponsoring of those things. They're almost unglamorous bits, aren't they? It's easy to sponsor a high-profile player who's playing in big events and get logos on T-shirts and stuff, but I guess it's less glamorous. supporting a development officer to go around a county and go into schools and put nets up, or try and get a beginner session going on a Thursday after work potentially. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, of course it does. I mean, we'll go off piste a little bit, because if you think back to, I can't remember what year it was, we played Germany at football, and we went over to Germany and we thumped them 5-1. Okay, lots of people remember that football match. I think Michael Owen got a hat-trick, even Emil Heskey scored. From that, there was a massive power shift in German football, and the German FA went right back to grassroots level and club level, and they changed the whole system. And there was no coincidence that Germany then all of a sudden emerged as a superpower of football and had untold success, winning the World Cup, winning the European Championships, because they were horrified by what had happened, and they wanted it to be so that never happened again. So they changed everything, and they reinvested in grassroots football, and clubs had to reinvest into the FA, and then all of a sudden the pot that went to the lower clubs and smaller places increased. So they were able to do more, and obviously again it's the numbers game, isn't it? You know, look at the Egyptians, you know, the amount of squash players they have in those areas. You are going to get those diamonds in the rough that come through and then inevitably become world champions. And again, it's that self-fulfilling prophecy. You've now got all those professionals right at the top, and they're all going back to their clubs, and they'll give back to the club, and they'll train with the next set that are coming through, like your Assaus and the girls that are coming through, and they're all training with each other, and then they're just churning player after player after player. And we need a real shake-up. But also it does stem from the coaches and clubs and the volunteers and all those people around the bottom end really sort of doing the work that they do, that helps us massively. You know, if it wasn't for my work ethic when I first took over as coach, I mean, don't forget, when I took over at Corals, I had no juniors. There was no junior set up there, gone. So I had to start from scratch. And, you know, just that knowing, like a routine, kids like a routine. So when they knew that I was going to be there every Wednesday for junior club night, every Saturday morning for junior squash, I was there whenever, if kids wanted to have individual sessions. There was adult club night, you know, there was the box leagues, there was everything going on there, and there was someone always there. Squash never got cancelled. I never cancelled junior morning. It's one of the things I refused to do. There was always Saturday morning squash. And, you know, at one point I was getting 50 kids through the door on a Saturday morning over the course of 3.5 hours. And it was because, you know, you had that routine, and then it's the word of mouth, isn't it? You know, Bob comes and plays, and he tells John, "Oh, I just played squash, it's brilliant. Come play with me next week. There's this guy, he makes it, you know, he's a right laugh, he's a bit of a wally, but he makes it fun," you know, and that's, you know, the coach's job as well, isn't it, to make it fun. And that's how you can engage the kids, by making it fun and making it a laugh and not being so serious, and letting them play. Letting them play, and just work it out. You show them the grip, show them the swing, you know, and do a bit of drop and drive, and then, you know, practice the serve. And once you see them hitting the ball, and work it out, and go and have fun. Let them smash the ball around with their mates.
Well, that's what Mick was saying. It's, you know, forget what the lines are. You know, nobody needs to worry about that. They just need to get the ball hitting the wall, and then the other person to chase it, and you know, keep it as simple as possible. But as soon as somebody's chasing a ball around and getting it back, and, you know, you have a 6-7 shot rally, and people are going into a deep lunge, and then they're a bit sore or whatever. It's, you know, that's the key, isn't it? It's making it fun from the get go. It's the coach then. So I guess is what you're saying. You know, there's the individual. The onus is on the individual, isn't it? As a coach or an enabler, or, you know, a foundation coach, or these volunteers. They've got to be individuals within clubs, within facilities, making these sessions happen. fundamentally, and it's got to be fun. That is a crucial part of this whole scenario, isn't it?
Yeah, but again though, it's that balancing act, isn't it, of getting a coach, getting a club that are proactive as well, and getting these sessions up and running, and you know, and the coach actually being able to earn a bit of money out of it as well, because at the end of the day, you know, you got to earn some money, haven't you? You got to pay the bills, and sometimes that's what makes it quite difficult for coaches, because you've got to put a lot of work in, and it's going to take time, and you're not necessarily going to earn fortune straight away. But you know, if you put the time and effort in, you can earn a living out of it. Obviously, we've lost a lot of coaches to the US. Money they're getting paid over there is really good, but you can earn money here too. You know, I was possibly thinking about trying to go over there before the whole situation with Hove Fitness Squash came about, and you know, I was toying with the idea. But then when the opportunity to lease the club that I love, you know, I've spent my whole life at, was on the table, I think it was a no-brainer really. I had to try it, otherwise I would have never forgiven myself. So yeah, it's one of those things. You've got to have a really motivated person, you know, really enthusiastic, that loves squash and that loves, you know, I like to muck around. I've always been a bit of a sort of jovial person, and likes to sort of play the fool and muck around, and I suppose that's something that helped when it was coming to the junior squash. But like Nick said, I've always been quite a firm believer in, you know, letting them play, a lot of free play, let them work it out, you know, 3/4 court, back court, you know, all people on the back wall playing front 3/4, front 2/3, whatever you want to call it, Egyptian 3/4, just letting them play and just letting them have fun, because as soon as you lose that fun, you lose them.
No, it makes total sense. So I mean, just in terms of coming back to the question about funding, and you know, this kind of development funding for going into schools, or getting a junior program off the ground, or getting a beginner adult program off the ground, is there any funding available through the counties, through England Squash, or really is that having to come from the individual to go, well, I can see the long-term benefit of this, so I'll take the hit on those first few sessions where maybe there's only 3 or 4 people turning up and it's a bit of a lost leader? You know, is there money available to kind of go, come on, right, we're going to run 6 and 8 week course?
No, I think there is funding available if you look at in the right areas. We as a county deal, you know, with the Southeast Forum. We do quite a lot with, you know, Chris Vine. Obviously, you know Chris well. You know, the efforts that he's put into to try and help grow the game in Essex, and also the Southeast is phenomenal. So again, you know, people like your Chris Vines of the world, without these people driving it, it's never going to get off the ground. But you know, there is funding available. We've tapped into funding, whether it's, you know, to get a few more nets, or to cover a little bit of the money to pay the coaches to go in and deliver the sessions. We have found there is funding available. Just need to know who to tap into. Luckily, we have Chris, who's a massive support, and he always sort of steers us in the right directions. But generally, when it was club stuff, I did it all myself.
Yeah.
And it just, you know, it just needs someone to be proactive. And you know, the squash community are a very generous community, and the people that love squash, you know, there are a lot of wealthy people in certain clubs that love the game. And I'm sure, you know, I'm a firm believer of, if you don't ask, you don't get. So, and if you're not going to be prepared to ask these people if they want to put their hand in their pocket, then you're never going to find out. So go and ask them. You know, we found amazing people at our club, amazing people that have come out of the woodwork to help us with the junior setup, and even sort of after we got closed down, you know, clients were emailing me or texting me saying, look, I want to help. What can I do? I want to help. I want to get my club back. So there are people out there. It's just knowing how to approach them and tap into what they can do to help you as well. Because I've not been able to do any of the stuff I've done without support and help from other people around me, whether it's, sort of someone like Graham Stevenson with the county setup, sponsors with Jazz and helping find out. I mean, because don't forget, playing the junior circuit, it's not cheap, and if you have a child who really takes a shine to the sport and wants to start playing the circuit and trying to build a national ranking, stuff like that, hotels every other weekend, and then going away with your county or playing for the region, and then playing the bronzes to get points up to the silvers and the golds and the platinums. It's minimum 5, 6, 7 grand a year. Maybe more, 10 grand. And so you've got 2 kids, crikey. So it's not cheap. So
no, it's not. I've got a lot to be thankful for to my dad for driving me around the country.
I think we've all got a lot to be thankful for our parents. I know I speak from that same thing as well. I mean, if it wasn't for my parents, I wouldn't be half the person I am today. So, no. But it's tough. I think we need to step up as a community to drive our sport. I mean, English squash are doing the best they can with their hands tied behind their backs. We as clubs are going to have constraints where we have our hands tied behind our backs for certain things. So I think just everyone needs to pull together, really. And
do you think that potentially we as squash players are going to have to acknowledge the fact we're going to have to stick our hands in our pocket a little bit more to kind of ensure the survival of the game? Because I think traditionally, maybe in the UK, squash is, certainly compared to the US, it's always been a cheap sport, right? We know it can be expensive, but often, coaching can be cheap when you compare it to a tennis coaching session or when you compare it to a PT session. And I think that has a knock-on effect throughout the sport, particularly in the UK, and people can be reluctant to put prices up, when I don't know, joining England squash goes up by £1, or paying their league fees or their match fee going up by £1. There can be kind of uproar around that. And obviously that, people are facing tougher financial times right now, but I think the sport is also, and I don't think there is that funding filtering down from the top in the same way that it used to be. And maybe some of that funding has to come in from a kind of grassroots level, and people be prepared to pay a little bit more for the sport now because there is less money in the sport. I don't know what your take.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? It's getting that balancing act right at grassroots level, that you make it accessible to the kids and it's not too expensive. Because once you do get on the circuit, it is expensive. But you make grassroots squash not expensive, but it's still kind of, I still think it falls under that umbrella of an elite sport, really, isn't it? And maybe we need to embrace the fact that it is an elite sport, and we try and sort of make it a little bit more sort of flamboyant in terms of sponsors, big sponsors, corporate sponsors. Whether we offer corporations these 3 days where they come in and they get to play the pros, and then they all get to sit there and have a nice glass of wine and a nice meal whilst they watch a big tournament. But obviously you have to just make it more accessible to the sponsors rather than the public. Obviously the public can watch it through live streams now, because social media has made squash far more accessible for people to watch. We need that money coming in from the corporate end. We need to make it more glamorous. So getting those £1 million purses is probably vital. But then, when you get £1 million purse, do you say, well, okay, you need to give a certain percentage to your governing body, or it goes to a squash foundation or a charity that helps run stuff within squash, so that not all the money goes on player prize money, but you do give a percentage back into the community to help fund stuff that they want to do, like the Germans would have done with the football. Obviously, football's another level. Money is just ridiculous. It's actually quite disgraceful, really, how much money is available to these professional footballers and how much money they get. But do we? I wish I knew. I mean, you see, sort of Channel, Danny doing a great job with Channel Vass, and sponsors putting up more and more money each year there, and all of a sudden the calibre of player got better there. More prize money was available in the US, and you had the big purses, but we need more money to come in at the base of the game as well to help grow what we want to do. But then we need people I think you need people in every sort of region and every county that have the same intentions as well, so that everyone can work together, because it's really important you make sure that the money gets funneled down into the right places, and it's utilised to its full potential and not wasted. I think that's happened quite a lot over the years. The funding's been available, but has it actually been used to full effect to what it needs to be used for? So,
yeah, well, it's an interesting one, and I guess we're gonna. Well, I guess I'm conscious of time, and I'm also I'd love you just to touch upon what you're most looking forward to now over the next few months, because obviously it's a big period for you. You as you say, you only had a couple of months of being open prior to lockdown, so you've got a brand new, your brand new venture effectively in your old club, but it's a new venture. So what are you most excited about within the context of the new venture, and then within the sport as a whole now, once things do kind of start easing?
I'm actually, do you know, one of the funniest thing is, I know I've taken on this new venture, but do you know one of the things I miss most when I'm not at the club, or we're stuck in lockdown, and the thing I enjoy the most, and it's probably one of the things that I always earned the least amount of money on, and it's something that I enjoyed the most, was my Saturday morning junior squash. And having those kids come in, like seeing them turn up and their faces light up because they were going to do what they loved for an hour or maybe longer, and just mucking around and having a laugh and trying to make these kids have a good time and enjoy squash. That's the bit I missed the most. But as a new venture, I want to, we as a club have invested in lockdown. We've moved our gym around, and we've created sort of a more functional area for people to do weight training, stuff like that. Made more space. We turned the old preschool into a designated spin studio. Had all the courts cleaned, and we had a lovely new bar. So one of our members took on the bar as they lease it from us, because that was just one job too many, as well as trying to renovate the club and get it looking how we want it to look as much as we could without spending a fortune on it, because it's not our club really. We've got an amazing bar, serve amazing beer and ale, and the bar was doing fantastically well the first month we opened. Members were starting to come back, so just want to have a clear run at it. I don't want to have to, oh crikey, November we're going down in for a month lockdown. We rented out all our spin bikes, we drove around Sussex, Brighton, dropping off our bikes for people to rent for the month. They're out at the moment, and we did all that in December, end of December again. We got them all back in the end of November, and then December we rented them back out again. So we've had amazing support with that. Just want a clear run, and actually get back into doing what I love, which is coaching. Tapping into what I had started that had gone, which is really want to tie in. There's 3 local schools literally within walking distance of the club. One was just started coming into the club when we got shut down. Want to sort of get them back, and then get these other 2 in, and really tie in a really strong link with these 3 local schools, and make the club a hub for them, and actually almost try and sort of enforce squash to become part of their curriculum in primary schools, where we might get kids down for a session a week or so. Whether we give them the courts for free, I don't know. I probably would like to do a really good deal with the schools to encourage them to get the kids down as like part of their PE. I want to run racquetball alongside squash, so they work together. and really try and grow the racquetball community. Because, like, classic example, had 2 tennis players in October turn up, 2 ladies, started inquiring about squash and racket, and they wanted a sort of an in-between game to play. So, bad of me, I know. I gave them 2 racquetball rackets and a ball and showed them what to do. And they were on the court for an hour, and they absolutely loved it. And they've been back like every week playing racquetball, just 2 of them on their own, just having a laugh as friends playing racquetball. So I want to get that up and running, want to tie that into schools. So I've got a lot of plans. And now that I'm sort of in a position that I've got sort of Phil, Noah, maybe some others that are around the county that want to earn some money doing coaching with the county initiative we're going to drive as well. It should hopefully be a good time, but there's just too much uncertainty still in when are we going to get back to being able, Izzy, for example, my youngest daughter, she was in the under 13s. She's desperate to go and play squash and compete again. And, when are we going to be able to get the juniors playing competitive team matches, and when are the club going to be able to play team matches? It's just a tricky one at the moment. We just don't really know. Still, although the vaccine rollout's unbelievable, there is light at the end of the tunnel. We still don't know exactly how it's going to play out yet. And we all have these aspirations that it's all just going to slowly unravel and we can get back to normal. But how normal is it going to be? When are we going to be able to do an inter-county festival where we, had all the counties turning up and there's 250, 300, 400, 500 people in one venue, and it's brilliant,
Yeah.
That was another thing. We didn't really touch base on that, but just quickly, always what I've noticed as a coach, I'll just throw it out there, that inter-county squash has always kind of been sort of like the least important in terms of where we should be looking for how we develop squash. But I have to say that when we run the inter-county competitions and you get all the kids playing as a team, the support that they get from their teammates is incredible. And when you play the inter-counties finals weekend, you can sometimes hear the other courts, right down the other end of the facility, kids are screaming their heads off because the number 5, who doesn't play junior squash, he doesn't play the circuit, he just plays squash for fun at this club and through the county and his local team.
Yeah.
Rocking up at number 5 for the county, and he's just won the national title because he's won his match and it was the decider. Do you know what I mean? And that part of the game, you go back to grassroots, that inter-county squash and sort of below that, where you create that team effect where they bond, is really important as well, because squash is very much an individual sport, and it's a very lonely sport, especially when you're losing. It can be the greatest sport in the world, but it can also be horrible. I think all the juniors that I've worked with on the junior level have understood that, from Izzy all the way up to Jazz. But when they're together as a team, sometimes you watch them play their best squash.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I have some of my fondest memories from the inter-county competitions that kind of within Wales, but then we used to compete in the national ones. And then, my earliest days, there was a competition called the 5 Counties, which was Gwent, Worcestershire, Somerset, or even there, maybe Avon, Worcestershire, Warwickshire. So it was just 5 of us, but it was just wonderful, and it used to be a real highlight of I probably played 5 or 6 from the age of kind of 9 or 8 or 9 up to 14. But that sense of bonding with your teammates, and but the aspiration to play for your county as well was such a significant thing at a really young age. It was almost like that great stepping stone, isn't it?
I just felt it's always been sort of pushed to the back of the queue a lot in the last 15 years. And actually, when you have these weekends away with your counties and see how much it means to some of those kids, maybe that needs to be tapped into a little bit more as well.
And I think it's a lot of value in that. I know Malcolm, I'm sure, talked about the value of playing for the county even at the senior level. The inter-counties at a senior level, again, has probably fallen away in a sense of importance compared to what it used to have. But he said, look, if you worked your way up to playing for Yorkshire at senior level 25 years ago, you were an incredible squash player, and there should have been a huge amount of value kind of placed on that. And I think some of that county value has been lost, and it's definitely something that's worth addressing and worth reconsidering, for sure, even if it's
massively
small local events spreading up to the national level. Well, Ben,
massively.
That seems like a good positive point to stop on revisiting the county tournament structure as a potential positive route forward, certainly at the junior level. But I want to thank you for your time today. It's been fascinating chatting, lots of really useful insight, and hopefully players, people who are enthused with the game or involved with the game, and will be enthused by what they've heard you say today, and we can bounce back from this lockdown and see the game bounce back over the next 12.
Yeah, just thank you for asking me to be on. Actually, I feel really quite proud to have been asked. So thank you, Jethro, for having me on Squash Skills. But yeah, just we all need to play our part, and the more people that we have being proactive towards trying to make squash more accessible, then I'm sure that the success or the numbers will come back. But it is going to take an effort, and we need people that are prepared to do it.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you, Ben.
Thank you very much.